Welcome.
Aha.
I'm glad to have everybody here. Robert W. Walker is a prolific writer who has written over 70 novels covering a range of genres: thrillers, horror, mysteries, historical fiction, and young adult. He grew up in Chicago, graduated from Northwestern University, where my middle son graduated, and has been a writing professor for over 40 years. Now he is focused on his writing after recovering from a stroke, and we are grateful to learn from him today. Let's give a warm welcome to Robert W. Walker. Okay, here we go. Glad to have everybody here, and we will begin.
Appreciate that introduction. I do have some, put some notes down in case
Sure.
people, but if you have any questions, interrupt me anytime. What my students do. I would say go back to your grammar textbook, the one you used in 4th grade, or the one you have from your parents, or your favorite grammar book, Elements of Style by E.B. White, the fellow that wrote Charlotte's Web. But I want you to go back to your grammar text and look up verb tense, present tense, past tense. All the other tenses can pretty much be ignored, but present and past. I would suggest if you've written a story in present tense, go back to it and rewrite it in past tense. I would also suggest that if you've written it in first person, go back to that story and write it in third person. The exercise will surprise you. It's a great teaching tool for oneself. I've written a whole novel in first person, went back and rewrote the whole thing in third person, and it made all the difference. I was able to sell the third person one. Okay. But that's a couple of exercises I use in my class. And that book that's over Wendy's shoulder there, Dead on Writing, is my class in a book form. And it's also an audio book and ebook. There we go. Just received it today. That's good timing. Most how-to books don't have exercises. Mine has exercises and lessons. One of the lessons is you go and find a picture that captures your imagination and write a story from that picture. It's a great exercise. It challenges you. And that's what I try to do with students, have them challenge themselves. Rather than write from their perspective, write from the perspective of a little kid in a village in Mexico trying to make a living, like Steinbeck's The Red Pony, The Pearl, some of his early works for young adult readers. He put himself in the shoes of other people. What made him a great storyteller. He liked to call himself a storyteller. So verb tense, start with verb tense. And if you got a pencil and paper, jot that down. Verb tense, past tense, present tense. And you have to decide which one you want to use in your story. I prefer past tense, the ed verbs. Present tense is all the s verbs. He says, she pleads, please, prays, plays, walks, present tense.
Okay.
Those are good for writing a play, script, movie script. But a novel or short story, I prefer the past tense, ed verbs. And even though they're ed verbs in past tense, it's happening now as you use them. In the story, it sounds exactly like it's happening now. I just prefer the past tense. But you need to be aware of that the whole time, which you have to be consistent. If you start out with present tense, stay with present tense all the way through the story. Some novelists are able to do that. I'm not, I can only do it with past tense in the novel.
Robert,
Short stories would.
we have a request that we can see your face. We need to be able to see your face so that we can hear you better. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you
There
so
I
much.
am.
Thank
Oh,
you.
back. Okay. Sorry, I'm not used to this kind of thing. This technology amazes me. Another thing, if you've got a pencil and paper nearby, jot down point of view. Present, one point of view, like Huckleberry Finn, one character, one point of view. Everything is sifted through his mind, his five senses. The five senses of one character. Also the sixth sense, which is the spiritual sense. And the five physical senses. Smell, taste, touch, hearing. All of that has to come in with a single character if you're using single point of view. And you have to be consistent with using that point of view. If you use multiple point of view, which I prefer, the story is told by going into the five senses of more than one character. And either one can be very well done. Huckleberry Finn is one character, but when he drops his G's on all of his words, you can't change that. You have to deal with that throughout the whole story, which can be frustrating. Yeah. So how a character speaks, especially when he's telling the whole story, he's the narrator. You just have to be consistent with his narration. Being consistent is very, very important. So point of view, one point of view, or the I call it I-itis. You can fall into too many I's with present tense point of view and first person. Now, this all sounds confusing, and it is. It's like, I don't know, juggling plates while you're on a cycle, at the same time. However, there is a book that I swear to you, the best book that deals with it. It's called Making Shapely Fiction by a guy who crawled into my head and told me how I do what I do. His name is Jerome Stern. Jerome Stern, Making Shapely Fiction. He goes into detail about point of view, verb tense, present tense, second, all the possibilities you can use. He also talks about the category, genre fiction. And he says, don't run from your genre, but embrace your genre. Right from that genre, you think it's already been done. Vampire story has been done to death. Why should I do a vampire story? But if you do it differently, if you do it in a fresh way, like Lost Boys, the category of vampires was gone. Nobody was doing it anymore because it's been done to death. Like today, I'm so sick of zombie stories and zombie movies. But if you come up with a new twist, Lost Boys came up with vampires on motorcycles. What a twist. I'm not hearing you, Wendy.
Oh, I'm not. I didn't say anything. I'm letting you talk.
There you are.
We're here to learn from you.
I wasn't sure. I thought you were saying something.
No.
So there's first person single. Everything, all the five senses are reported through one person. The single, only one character. And that's a legitimate thing to do, but it's limiting. All the story is told through one person's eyes, ears, nose. The second person is just about as limiting. It's told from you. I say to my students, you can fall into I-itis, kind of a disease with first person. You can do the same with you-itis. Overdoing the you word, you, your. like I, me, mine. Overdoing it with, instead of, what's cool about third person is you have so many different ways to refer back to everything and everyone in the story and oneself, using names and never throw out a name when you use a name, like name of a tree, a lake. It's not just a lake, it's Moon Lake. It's not just a tree, it's an elm tree. Always use names. In the third person, that works beautifully. In the first person, that should be done too, name names. Instead of pronouns. You can get trapped by pronouns. Nobody knows which pronoun you're talking about. You can have discussions where somebody is talking about somebody else. You don't know who they're talking about because they're referring to she, her, herself. Who are you talking about? Oh, you're talking about your sister-in-law. Okay, now I get it. So name names. You should be jotting this down because you're going to forget it. That's why I said paper and pen when I talk. So second person, third person is the most omniscient, omniscient narrator. From that multiple point of view, you get every character's perspective that's in the story. So you got four people in a wooded cabin, and you get the perspective of each one. You're changing from perspective to another perspective. Not in the same paragraph. You don't want to change perspectives in the same paragraph. However, one scene, next scene. I do the killer sometimes in present tense, point of view, quietly doing his own mind in his mind. And then I go back to the medical examiner. Then I go back to the police officer who's working with the medical examiner. In my historical novels, I use this multiple point of view as well. I just feel comfortable with multiple point of view in third person. But Jerome Stern has somehow captured how writers imagine things, how writers work. He also tells you all these various points of view and past tense, present tense, how they work. It's just a great book. It's only a small book, $5. I'm sure it's still on still on eBay or Amazon. Unfortunately, Jerome, before he came to my class to talk to my students, somehow he passed away. So I never got to meet him face to face. But when I read his book, I started using it as a textbook in my classes for making shapely fiction. Great title. He does a lot with how publishing works too. And just a great little book. My own book, Dead on Writing, I steal a lot from him and placed it in my own book. My book, Dead on Writing, is really my class, the class that I taught in book form. Let's see, I jotted down first person, second person, third person. These are things we learn in fourth grade, but we forget about them. Yeah. Or we've gone on. But any one of them you can find in your grammar textbook. Or you go to Jerome Stern's book. See, yeah, you can do a chapter or a scene and mix it up with all five senses and point of view with each scene or chapter from a different character's point of view. I have at the end of my City for Ransom, Ransom is about to die. He's in the hospital, and even if he survives the gunshot, he still has infection to deal with. In hospitals in the 1800s, infection was the biggest killer. So each of the characters, the ensemble of characters, I do a chapter with each one, thinking about what life would be without Ransom in the city of Chicago. And so I've got multiple endings with each character that love him, you know. So it's kind of a cool ending. His woman goes through how she feels about it. His best friend, how he feels about it. How his would-be daughter, how she feels about it. So it's kind of a cool way to end in your story. He survives, by the way, for four more books. Actually, I think I've got 7 books with them now. I publish when the publisher ends your series, might be on 3 books, might be on 4 books, but with ebooks you can carry on the character, which I'm not done with the character, so I create a new title with Ransom until he gets to the Titanic, and he's on the Titanic. He doesn't whimper though; he rides that sucker down. He's a tough guy. I put a monster on the Titanic with him, and yeah, the monster answers all the classic questions about the Titanic, why it went down, and by putting a monster on the Titanic, it really answers all those tangential questions. We wonder, why didn't they have binoculars on board? That still amazes me. There was no binoculars. True story. I do a lot of research, even for my horror books. If I'm doing a vampire book, I do research on bats and the life of bats. So werewolves, I do research on wolves to make my werewolves categorically believable. Research is heavily important in my books. There isn't a book I've done. Even my first book was a young adult historical novel. I was working on the Underground Railroad. I got about 50 pages in. I realized that I didn't have enough knowledge of the railroad. I went back, did more research, and started over again. Research creates a backbone for your story, a river that runs through the story. The thread is an interesting thing. I'm working on a book right now with a friend of mine who's a police officer, lives in Vegas, and he doesn't know what a thread is in a story. It's a river that runs through the story. I've got him going to classes at night for the medical examiner, classes that the medical examiner teaches. And so he has to go back to class, go back to class, go back to class. That's a thread that runs through the story. Another thread is the situation where he comes from a Midwestern town and a culture shock of working in Vegas. That's a thread that runs through it. So you pull those threads and you can keep going. You can keep with your novel going, keep moving with your novel. And you can have 3, 4 threads. Those are things that you keep coming back to as the author, that you find it's important to remind the reader that what he's learning from the medical examiner, he takes to the street. He's a death investigator. So he's the first one on scene, and no one else can touch the body. So that's why they're teaching him lessons. And he's already learned all that stuff in the Midwest, but now he's got to learn it in Vegas because it's different. The laws are different in Vegas. Yeah. Nevada, Illinois. Let's see, I had something else there. First person, the third person also changes the voice of the story. That's the most important thing in writing. What is the voice? You got to find your voice for this particular story. If you do like I do and you write different genres, you're going to have a different voice for each one. I have young adult books. The narrator is going to be a very different voice. police crime novels, medical examiner series, it's going to be a different voice, the narrated voice. And you have to find where that is. I say it's a police authority. The authority, the person who's in charge tells that story, and then the characters take over the dialogue. And the characters have their own voice. They may use slang. They may talk about, they can goof around and use dark humor around the body, which nobody else would do. Not even your narrator would do. Your narrator doesn't stop in the point in the middle of the story and make a joke about the body, but the characters can. Really makes a difference in the voice you want to create. If it's a sweet voice about a horse that survives the massacre, it's going to be a sweet voice. It's told from the point of view of the dog, the horse, the dog, the chipmunk. It's going to be a sweet story. The voice will be sweet. And you want to be consistent with your voice. You don't want your narrative voice changing. In the middle of one of my stories, the narrator uses the word cops, not COP, but COPSE, which is a grouping of trees. And to this day, I'm sorry I used that, because that is a word that the narrator should not have used. It's a word you have to look up in the dictionary. Why was the narrator using copse of trees when he could have said a group of trees or a gathering of trees? I broke with the narrative voice, and everybody's going to do that once in a while, but on rewrite, you try to catch yourself. Oh, would the narrator really say that word or use that word? How I rewrite, too, is very important. A lot of people hate rewrites because they finish the book and they think they have to go back to the beginning and do the whole book. No, don't do that. You do the first 3 chapters. You go back and you reread and rewrite those first 3 chapters, and then you start on chapter 4, because those first 3 chapters will tell you where to go next. And you will have done the rewrite with those first 3 chapters already. So I see it as an ebb and flow. And you rewrite. You don't have to hate your rewriting. In fact, it can be a great experience to rewrite. You can learn a lot about yourself and your writing, your narrative voice, the voice of your characters. If one of your characters drops all the G's, like Huckleberry Finn, you got to keep consistent with that. You can't change that. Suddenly he doesn't start, using the G's and when you say hollering or yelling or, creeping, he's going to have the apostrophe instead of the G. And look at Mark Twain. He manages to use the vernacular without overdoing it. And some people overdo it. He does use a term, going GYWN, and it's really like a slave word for going. Here in West Virginia, everybody says, I'm gonna get it out the door. If you start that in your story, you have to maintain it all the way through, because that's your character's speech pattern. So you want to be careful with that stuff, because it locks you into kind of slavishly, unless that guy gets a lesson from an English professor and changes his ways all of a sudden in the middle of the book. But it's not likely. You want your characters to have their own voice, separate from the narrative voice. The narrative tells the basic general story, but the characters have their own lives, and you got to let them walk and talk their own walk and talk. But you want your characters, even before I start a book, I try to get my characters around the pickle barrel or the hot stove in an old what's that word? An old grocery store and apothecary around the stove and talking about the main issue of the book before I even start the book. You know, I don't want the characters to have their own voices and the way they walk, the way they talk, and I want to get them walking and talking. That's part of the play part. You want to play within the novel, the play within the story, or the novella. I do novellas, I do novels, I do short stories. Let's see, point of view within that. Oh yeah, get that grammar book out and look up active versus passive voice. And some of you probably, oh, I've already done that. But many of us haven't looked at that since fourth grade. I've been teaching it. I teach it. I've taught it. I teach it. So I'm very aware of how passive can really slow your story down to, really badly. A difference between active and passive. Passive is the bus came down the street and picked little Susie up. It sounds like the bus is more important than little Susie. No, little Susie stepped onto the bus and shouted at her friends as she walked down the aisle. That's active. Your character is moving and talking and crying and shouting. Use all those active verbs, not, the door hit her on the way out. On the way out is kind of slow, passive. She felt the door bump her behind on the way out. Get your actor at the beginning of the sentence, along with the verb. Matter of fact, look at most stories like Steinbeck or O. Henry or any of the classics, Dumas, Twain, and you'll find that 90% of their sentences are subject, verb, with that verb being an active verb. Subject, verb, and the rest of the sentence take care of itself. Subject, verb, first word, subject. James ran, James looked, James stepped, James slapped, James or Jeremiah or she wept, Jesus wept. Jesus wept for all mankind. For all mankind is object, but that subject and verb, most powerful way to write. Make sure. You can add fragments at the beginning. At the tender age of 13, while sitting in the temple, comma, Jesus wept. Jesus wept is still the subject and the verb, the most important two words in the sentence. That's a hammer blow, just the kernel sentence. Just Jesus wept, period. It still works. Dogs fly. Dogs bark. Yeah. But whatever else comes around it is a fragment. All these introductory, interrupting fragments. Jesus, comma. At the age of 13, comma, wept for all mankind. Now, that takes two commas. Introduction only takes one comma. At the tender age of 13, comma, Jesus wept. If I could write a grammar book, I would do inside that book what they did with biology. The overlays, you start with the kernel sentence, Jesus wept. Now you overlay an introductory fragment. At the age of 13, in the temple, that's two fragments. You overlay that introductory fragment. Now you overlay the interrupting fragment, Jesus at the same age, comma, wept for all mankind. So you get these overlays. I would love to be able to do that, but haven't found a publisher that's interested in me doing a grammar text. However, you can go back to any grammar text and look up, in Jerome Stern's book, look up voice, how you want to create the voice of your story. Stern is the master at telling us how to do that. I learned a lot from him. And I felt like he crawled into my mind and told me how I do what I do. And that was kind of scary, like a psychic, looking right through you. But I thought, wow, what an amazing talent that he has to tell writers how they do what they do. Aside from active and passive voice, looking that up, they'll have some sentences for you to work with, like 2 or 3 pages, just 2 or 3 pages. And boom, you got it. You got it. You understand active versus passive. And you want to stay away from passive, which means stay away from was. If you start a book and you put it right away down, it's probably because the first paragraph, the first page, or the first scene, or the first chapter was full of the word was, or were, which is the plural form of was. Was it's for one person, were is for 2, 3. But those are passive verbs. Passive verbs are killers of drama. You can't have drama with passive verbs. Let's see. I keep leaning forward. I'm sorry. Let's see. Another thing you need to look up in your grammar text. This is a tricky one. Absolutes versus qualifiers. And again, since 4th grade, you may not have heard that. Qualifiers are adverbs. Anytime you use the ly word, you think it's adding to the power of your verb, but actually it's taking the focus off the strong verb and putting it on the ly word. So, and the word very, it looked very cold outside. No, it looked cold outside. It's either cold or it's not. Very says, yeah, we can guess at it. It looked very cold. No, it's cold. Another example, the fog seemed to be absolutely, maybe, perhaps, lifting from the cemetery. No. It either lifted or it didn't. So lifted is the absolute. The fog lifted from the cemetery. That's creepy, and it's also to the point. And it's Hemingway. Hemingway called Huck Finn the most important book of American fiction because Twain did the same thing. Twain said, if in doubt, strike it out. ly words are sometimes, I use them myself, but I have to really think about it. Do I really want to use that ly word to Christmas tree, the verb, or is the verb strong enough to stand on its own? The qualifier, the verb qualifier is an adverb. Think about a qualifier as a word that cuts you off at your knees from behind, like football. They call it clipping. You're clipping yourself. You're clipping the sentence. Go for the strong word. Go for the word that's in the sentence that is a strong verb. I'm trying to think of another example. I like to use examples. The lake was seemed to be very large. From his perspective, the lake seemed to be very large. From his perspective, the lake was very large, although I don't like the word was. The lake appeared, looked like, appeared, ongoing until the horizon. Looked huge, or looked small. The lake looked smaller than they said it was. Looked is a good, active, powerful verb. That's why I like to use ed, because ed words are strong. That's one of the reasons I use the third person because you're gonna have to use all the ed verbs instead of the es verbs. Qualifiers are words like very or seemed, maybe, perhaps. Perhaps the fog was lifting. Perhaps the lake was large. What is that? Is it large or isn't? It's the author. Is the author unsure? You know, that's what it sounds like. It sounds like wishy-washy. The author doesn't know what he's talking about. Right away, the reader says, well, this guy doesn't really plant the seed for good reading. Qualifiers, watch out. Now, you can go to your grammar text and look up absolutes versus qualifiers. And if it's not in your grammar text, find another grammar text. I'm not sure Stern went into detail for this kind of thing, but this is grammatical. Like active versus passive, which you may have heard many times. But go back and see if you can find some sentences for qualifiers versus absolutes. The absolute word is the strong word. It doesn't use like and as tall as. It just says he is tall, or he was tall, or he stood in the doorway and bumped his head. That's much better. He hit his head in the doorway. That makes him tall. Instead of saying he was as tall as a tree, which is kind of nice. He looked like a tree. You know, like and as work with much better uses. But like and as are metaphorical. They set up a metaphorical, I mean, nobody's as big as a tree, but he was as tall as a tree. It works, but, you know, to be absolute, the man is a tree, equals a tree. The man as strong as a tree becomes an equal sign there, is equals. The man is strong as a tree. My Uncle John was like that. A huge little Cherokee, but man, his arms were huge. His arms were as broad as a tree branch. Okay, let's see what else do I have. I hope people are taking hope people are taking notes on this because you never remember all this. Let's see. Careful of prepositions. Prepositions, there's only about 40 of them. And they lead you into another direction. And they can be very helpful. Jesus wept for all mankind. For all mankind is a prepositional phrase. For is a preposition. And for all mankind, mankind is the object of the preposition. It also works as the object of the sentence. Subject, verb, object. English works as subject, verb, object. A lot of other languages begin with the object, verb, subject. That's why we can't understand each other. Yoda speak. But think about how Yoda speaks. Brave he is. You know, instead of he is brave. But if you follow prepositions, it may lead you in the wrong direction. But be aware of prepositions. Prepositions are words like to, in, up, down. They're all directional words. We like to use them, and sometimes we overuse them in a sentence, and it becomes unpractical to understand a sentence because of all the prepositions. That's when you becomes a serpentine sentence. It looks like a run-on, but it's not really a run-on. It's just too many prepositional phrases. Let me give you an example.
Robert, I don't mean to interrupt you, but Rebecca has a question.
Oh, okay. I like being
If
interrupted.
anybody that has a question, just raise your hand.
Sure.
Okay. Robert, I was just going to ask something you said earlier, and it brought to mind something I've been working on. A story that I'm writing. It's an ensemble, it has four women, closely, well, their experience is close to mine. This is going back on experience I've had. My problem is keeping the characters straight when they're having like a group discussion. How do you do that? What's the best way to keep the individuals separate while keeping them part of the story?
Oh, give them character traits that are different from the other character traits. Like one policeman I'm working with right now, he's very cynical. He's kind of had it with Vegas. Even when he finds another old person who's come back to Vegas to commit suicide because that's the place where they had the best time of their lives. He's just sick of seeing it, and he's very hardened. And the guy that's working with him is new to the area, and he has absolute different reaction to the suicide, particularly the autoerotic suicide that happens so often in Vegas. And so one that still has caring, compassion. The other one is done with that, So if you can think about their character traits and what the experiences have led them to who they are, I say live with your character for a long time until you fully recognize who that person is. Think about their bedrock character traits. And let's say the bedrock character trait is fear. Then you want to put them in a situation where they have to overcome that fear. Or if you have a character that is fearless, like James T. Kirk in Star Trek, he always beams down and he shouldn't even be leaving the ship, The other captain never leaves the ship because he doesn't want to leave the ship because it leaves it in limbo. And so he talks and talks and talks, but Kirk is an action guy. His trait is fearlessness. But how do you then throw rocks at that? How do you challenge that trait? So that makes your characters different. Even though they may be in an ensemble, they're all working for the same solution or the same goal. All characters should be achieving or working toward some goal. One might be working toward retirement, and he's kind of cynical, sick of the job. And then you got the new guy comes on. Think about that TV show ER. If you can go back to that in your mind, and the young guy that comes in, Noah, I forget his last name, his real name. Noah comes in, and he's the new guy, and he's just startled by everything, what's going on in the ER. Whereas the older guy, Clooney, has seen it all, and he's not surprised by any of it. And what the nurses might do, should shock somebody, But they're old hands at this. And actually, winds up what they do. They push the doctor away. And I'll take care of this. You don't know what you're doing, and they get in trouble for that. But their bedrock trait says, "I got to save this person. I can't let this doctor kill this person." So I hope that helps.
It does. It gives me a start. Now, in this particular instance, I'm thinking of a certain scene in my mind. These women are sitting around. There's the four women, and of course the narrator. My problem in this, visually creating a visual image is not a problem. I've got that. My problem is when I start doing the dialogue and start trying to create the story. My problem is keeping the characters separate to where it all makes sense, to where the reader doesn't have to sit and go back and say, well, this person said this, so this person said this, and so this must be this person saying this. My problem is keeping all that separate.
Two things you can do with that bedrock character. Think of this bedrock that they have. They're built on certain rocks, and you want to fully realize the character you want to live with them. You know, you take showers and you plant flowers and whatever you're doing, you're thinking about this character. You spend some time with them. Each character, you spend more time with the main character than anybody else.
Mm.
Also, look at your main character is in the middle of a web, and everybody else around her, it's close to her. And as the web gets further and further apart, this is the killer at the bottom of the web, or the furthest end of the web. But she's also got a doctor, a dentist. She's in the story. She's got a boss, and she has conflict with some of these people. And even if it's somebody she loves, she might have conflict with her sister because her sister's drinking too much and whatever. But yeah, spend some time with those characters and think about what they would say and do in that situation, even if that situation doesn't happen in your story. But there was something else I wanted to say about that. You can keep little notes about your character. What I do is I go back and reread the chapters that I've already done rather than keep character notes. I do kind of keep character names here and there because I forget the names. But you go back and reread your first chapter, second chapter, third, and then you're in your fourth chapter and you know those characters' names and you know what they're capable of, and you know what they're like and what they're capable of in the future. Think about any Clint Eastwood movie opens with Clint doing something outrageous. And if he's capable of that, what is he capable of doing in the rest of the story? So don't be afraid to open your first chapter with a wild situation that your main character takes care of. And that says who he is or who she is. The characters are built on what they say, their dialogue, and what they do. And isn't that true in life? Well, we judge people by what they say and what they do. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
I see another teacher cozying up to another teacher at my college, and I make judgments, even though that may be wrong. You know, but you can't help but make judgments with people what they do. You know, if he's got his hand on her in any improper way, then you make a judgment. So what a person does and says, that's how we build character. But we also challenge the bedrock of that character. And that character may be flawed, but it comes through in a situation where he needs to come through. Going back to Captain Kirk, and I forget the other captain's name, but he never goes out of the boardroom, you know. But he gets things done through intellectual way, whereas Kirk gets things done through action.
Okay.
What's that other character's name?
Picard?
I like Kirk. I
I'm
like
thinking of
Kirk because
Picard.
he's an action guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Picard was
That's
on
a
his
very
head.
interesting question. That's a very useful question you bring up.
It's one I've struggled with for a while, because I really want to tell a story. It's based on real people. In the story that I got out of dealing with these four women, I really feel needs to be told, but of course it's got to be fictionalized. But I was having trouble. In my mind, these women are individuals, but just getting it, giving it the what it needs to have done, the treatment it needs. I've had trouble with it.
If you try my ebb and flow rewrite, you got to rewrite anyway. Go back to first chapter. It'll remind you who the characters are. It'll remind you what traits they have and what they've said and done already, what they're capable of doing in the future. I use that ebb and flow with all my rewriting, and it gives a storyline that's connected, connectivity, connective tissue comes in that ebb and flow writing. A lot of people wait until they do the whole novel or the whole story or a whole novella, and then they go back to rewrite, and they feel angry that they have to rewrite the whole thing. Well, if you do it like I do it, you never have to rewrite the whole thing.
Mhm.
It's a process, a method that it's been very good for me.
I'll try it because I hate rewriting. I hate it. It's by the time I get finished writing what I'm writing, I'm over it. I'm tired of these people. I just want them really gone. So I have to go back and rewrite, and sometimes I have to rewrite 2 or 3 times, and it's just each time I hate it that much more.
If you're writing about real people, just the names I've found over the years, and I'm working on 90 book now. Nobody recognizes themselves. They think themselves wonderful, even if you make them the villain. They recognize that, you know. They do not
Okay.
recognize themselves in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's 99% true. They want to be.
It's interesting. I never thought about it
themselves.
that way, but of course, people I know show up in my stories. They don't recognize them unless I turn them into a caricature.
Yeah, if you point it out.
Yeah.
I've had people say, I want you to put me in their book, and I want to be the hero, and I want to be another person says, I want to be the crazy mad killer.
Mm-hmm.
I use that guy in like 3 or 4 books because he keeps escaping.
Yeah.
Bad Matisak. And the kid
I
was
would love to say, yeah, I did use you. You were the collie.
Yeah, this was a high school. This was my son's high school friend. I want to be in your book. And now he goes to buy bookstores to show his family that he's in the book. Yeah. Well, I hope that that answers your question, but think about your characters in a web. As a matter of fact, on Amazon, I've got something about the web construction of your characters.
Mm-hmm.
And some are more important to your main character than others. And see it like a spider web going, and she's at the center. And that can be a very helpful tool. I call it the web construction. Works for a short story too. Short stories should be circular. The beginning should be the ending, and the ending should be the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Everything in the middle could be flashbacks. But if you started in a driveway, you got to come back to the driveway.
Mm-hmm.
Or the back seat of the car or whatever. Or the closet where she's locked in the closet. Come back at the end, and she's weaponized herself with a long knitting needle, and he's opening the door. And that's the end of the story. Boom. It begins in the closet, ends in the closet.
Mm-hmm. You see that not in movies.
You're welcome. And keep writing, because writing keeps you sharp, and even on days when you can't write, I feel badly. I got to write at least a paragraph or 2, or do some rewriting.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me feel better. It's like the football guy that's he's on the bench, and the coach, send me in, coach. Writing is very, very healthy. Makes you feel better. Even if you just do a poem, makes you feel better.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working off a stroke. I'm doing much better. My wife calls me a miracle. I was ready to go. They were, they were measuring me for coffin.
Mm-hmm.
I was in ICU for 3 months.
Mm.
Well, they shaved me bald, got my hair back. I'm walking on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think writing has helped me get back.
I can see it. Yeah.
Well,
All
we're
the
happy to learn
psychiatrists,
from you.
all the shrinks say writing is healthy.
Mm-hmm. That's why they tell you to journal.
Or if you're a painter, artwork, or whatever, gotta have something. Well, I'm glad I was able to help you with that question.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's see, there's something else. Yeah, prepositions. There's about 40 of them. Beware when you're using them. Jesus wept for all mankind. In the beginning, comma. That begins with in. That's a fragment. That's a prepositional fragment. Sometimes they're very, very useful, but you want to be aware that when you're using 3 in a row, early in the morning, at the time of publication, in the city of Los Angeles, you can string them along and string them along, and they become redundant, you know. And I like to use serpentine sentences, and that's how you get to a serpentine sentence, using too many prepositional fragments. In, up, down, to, for, before, after. Many of them are time words. Before the party, after the party, during the party. Those are introductory fragments, but they're using prepositions. Many of them are directional words. In, up, down, to, for. Take a look in the grammar text about prepositions as well as the other. See, we said absolutes versus qualifiers. So you can be a better writer overnight if you look at these grammatical issues. You'll be a better writer overnight, getting away from passive sentences. Was, were. Prepositions too send a kind of a passive feeling. So careful of prepositions, look that up, and haven't really dealt with them since 4th grade, possibly. 4th grade was a wonderful year for most people. If you had the right teacher, that's when you started really reading and writing and loving reading and writing. Yeah, Jerome Stern's Making Shapely Fiction. Read that, and read my book, Dead On Writing. Dead On Writing is my class in a book. First person, third person, point of view, and voice, all those things we talked about. When you read a book like Treasure Island, it took you away because of the voice. The person was telling you the story and the voice that he used, whether it was whispering or shouting, that voice just captured you. I had a nice review once that said, Walker's books will take your mind away for the duration of the story. And I love that blurb from that newspaper. Now, that's what I try to do with each of my stories. I'm working on my 90-second story, so I'm either obsessed or crazy or nuts or just a storyteller by birth. I did my first story writing in 7th grade, and I wrote my first novel in high school, Daniel Webster Jackson and the Wrong Way Railway. It was a homage to Mark Twain. I had read all the Mark Twain books, and I thought there should be a sequel to Huckleberry Finn. And I got mad when I found out there was none. I got mad at Twain. And my librarian at school just laughed in my face. And so I thought, well, after a week, I thought, well, hell, I'll write it myself. Challenge yourself is what it's all about, challenging yourself. Oh, heck, I can do that. I wanted to do something about retired police detectives that were called back into service. And there's a group of them in my Chicago. It's they only handle X-File cases because nobody else wants them. So the first one was Gone Gorilla, and this gorilla, stuffed gorilla, in the museum in Chicago. It's really there. It's called Bushman. I used to see him as a kid, and I always thought, this is terrible. They stuffed him and put him in a case, and I have him break out. Gone Gorilla. That's the first in a series called Chicago's. So I had to challenge myself. How does it come alive? What brings it to life? And I saw an article about the lady whose parents sold that little baby gorilla to the museum, I'm not the museum, the zoo in Chicago. And she comes back to visit, and all she sees is the stuffed animal. And she comes back in a wheelchair in Chicago. And she's the one that gives it the magic to come back to life. I didn't know how I was going to do it until I saw the article about her. And I read the article. That was my research. And there was also another artwork in the museum that was a Polynesian magic thing where you hit a nail into this big piece of wood, and you can make a wish when you put the nail in. So I used that and the lady who came back as ways to bring the stuffed animal back to life. And this is a 450 pound silverback gorilla. And everybody in Chicago loved this gorilla, but he hated people. People come by his way too small cage, and he would throw feces at him. I saw him when he was alive, and I thought he was magnificent. So I wanted to bring him back to life. So it's a horror, kind of a horror mix, but I also spent a lot of time with retirement, police retirement, and they create a group of 4, and I had to separate each character. So I did it with one is Polish, one is black, one is typical white guy, and then one is a lady. So that helped distinguish each character, their backgrounds, and they were different cops in different places. And they all worked with the guy that created the group, and he's a captain. He said there are some cases that nobody will take. Would you be interested? Oh, sure. Anything other than retirement. Any other questions out there? Yeah, I jotted down all these notes to make sure
So much.
that I didn't forget. I didn't want to forget to cover some areas. Those
Sure.
areas are very important. Go back to your text. 4th grade. Most of us don't use these things because we get involved with devices and movies and our lives and wives and children. I think most writer's block is really life block. Life overtakes our time to write. Yeah, but if we consistently get an opportunity to write, we consistently get that time. That's why most writers that are successful have a writing period, a writing time. They put aside for writing, and they make it serious for family members to realize this is my writing time. Unless there's blood, I don't want to hear about you. Unless there's blood, stay out of my office. What about you, Wendy? You have a question?
Well, I just want to, what I want to do is invite you back, if you want to come back again. And I just love learning from you and entering your world. Before we stop, I want to share my screen again to show your website.
Well, I think you'll learn a lot.
I think that's really nice. Yeah. Yeah.
You'll learn a lot from the book.
I have your book there. And this is your book series.
It's the only, that's a better how-to book than Stephen King's supposedly how-to book. It was crap. I'm sorry, but he didn't teach anything in it. It was just an ego trip.
You got a lot of good stuff here. Yeah, very interesting. It's unusual that somebody will write different genres like that.
I think it's a great short story.
Genres. Yeah.
His short stories are beyond his novels. They're more philosophical, they're scarier, more pointed, more purposeful. But his how-to had no purpose. It was like one of those books where they say, if you want to be a writer, just go jump in a lake, a cold lake, jump in naked, and you'll come out a writer. No. It doesn't work that way. You spend time at the writing, you create a time period where you write. I like to write in the mornings. Some people like to write in the evening, some people like to write after midnight. But it's a schedule, you create a schedule. So I think we've gone over time, huh?
Well,
Are we over time?
thank you. Do you have a question, Linda? Do you have a question? Okay, well, so we'll end the recording now, but I just so thank you, everybody, for coming
I've got
in.
Linda-
and I
I've got
want to
Linda,
invite you
question.
back.
She afraid to ask? I'll hang on as long as people have questions. Well, it's like a good rock star, I'll go for an encore. I'd be happy to come back.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, we thank you so very much for coming.
It's stupid.
Yeah.